Look closely at the image on your screen right now. It is a grainy black and white photograph from over a century ago. You're looking at a bird with a proud curved beak and striking white-edged feathers on its throat. It looks alive, alert, and perhaps a bit curious about the giant wooden box with a lens pointed at it. But here is the haunting reality. You are looking at a phantom. This specific individual was one of the very last of its kind, and today, there is not a single one left on this planet. We often think of extinction as something that happened millions of years ago to dinosaurs, but many of the most beautiful and unique birds to ever grace our skies vanished right under our noses, often captured in the lens of a camera just moments before the curtain fell forever. Today, we are going inside the archives to look at the final photographs and the final moments of birds that no longer exist. These aren't just pictures. They are the only physical evidence we have left of a song that has gone silent, and a beauty that will never be seen again. We're diving straight into the stories of these lost travelers, starting with a bird that once darkened the skies of North America by the billions. Imagine looking up and seeing a cloud so thick it blots out the sun for 3 days straight. That isn't a metaphor. In the mid-1800s, the passenger pigeon was the most numerous bird on the entire planet. There were an estimated 3 to 5 billion of them. When they flew over a city, the sound of their wings was like a literal gale wind, and their droppings fell like snow. It seemed impossible that anything could ever happen to them. Yet, by the early 1900s, they were gone. The photograph you see here is of Martha. Martha lived at the Cincinnati Zoo, and she was the very last passenger pigeon on Earth. In this photo, taken shortly before she passed away in 1914, she looks remarkably calm, perched alone in her enclosure. There is a profound sadness to this image when you realize that just 50 years prior, her ancestors moved in flocks that stretched for 300 miles. Martha died at 29 years old, and with her, an entire species that pulse beat through the heart of a continent simply evaporated into history. Now, let's travel to the North Atlantic, to the rocky, freezing islands where the great auk once ruled. If you look at this rare illustration based on the last sightings and the very few early photographic attempts of museum specimens, you see a bird that looks a bit like a penguin. Though they weren't related, they were flightless, clumsy on land, but incredibly fast in the water. They were the original auxi. The tragedy of the great auk is that as they became rarer, their value to collectors went up. In June of 1844, the final pair was found on the island of Elde. They were incubating an egg, a single hope for the future. People often ask, why didn't we save them? The truth is, back then, the concept of conservation barely existed. We didn't realize that once the last one goes, they stay gone forever. Looking at the sketches and the very early daguerreotypes of their preserved remains, you can see the majesty of a bird that was perfectly adapted for the harsh Atlantic, only to be overtaken by a world that changed too fast for them to keep up. Moving to the tropical paradise of Hawaii, we find a story that is perhaps the most heartbreaking of all because of how recently it happened. This is the Kauai o'o. In this rare film footage, and the resulting still frames from the late 1980s, you see a small, dark bird with beautiful yellow leg feathers. It's hopping through the dense foliage of the Alakai Swamp. The Kauai tour was famous for its haunting, flute-like song. They were known to mate for life, and they would sing duets together, their voices interlocking in a complex melody. By 1987, there was only one left, a single male. Researchers managed to record him singing his heart out into the forest. But he wasn't just singing for fun. He was singing the female's part of the duet, pausing exactly where his mate should have responded. He waited for a reply that would never come. He was the last soul of his kind, singing a duet by himself in the middle of a vanishing forest. When you look at his photo, you aren't just looking at a bird. You're looking at the end of a musical tradition that lasted for millions of years. Let's talk about the Carolina parakeet. It's hard to believe now, but the United States used to have its very own native parrot. They were vibrant, with green bodies and bright yellow and orange heads. They were social, loud, and incredibly loyal to one another. This photograph of Incas, the last known Carolina parakeet, was taken at the Cincinnati Zoo, the same place where Martha the pigeon lived out her final days. Incas died in 1918 reportedly of a broken heart just a year after his mate, Lady Jane, passed away. The Carolina parakeet's downfall was actually their loyalty. If one bird was hurt, the rest of the flock wouldn't fly away. They would circle back and hover over their fallen companion, which meant that collectors could capture an entire flock all at once. In the photo, Incas looks surprisingly regal, a flash of tropical color in a world that was becoming increasingly industrial. Next, we look at the heath hen. This was a ground-dwelling bird from the scrubby barrens of North America, a relative of the greater prairie chicken. By the late 1920s, the entire world population was restricted to the island of Martha's Vineyard. This photograph from 1932 shows Booming Ben. That was the nickname given to the very last heath hen. For years, Ben would fly to the traditional lekking grounds, the spots where his ancestors had gathered for thousands of years to perform their elaborate mating dances. Ben would puff out his orange neck sacs and make a deep, booming sound that could be heard for miles. He did this every morning, year after year, standing alone in the clearing, waiting for a female that no longer existed. This photo of Ben standing solitary against the horizon is one of the most powerful images in natural history. It represents the quiet, dignified end of a lineage that had survived the Ice Age, only to find itself alone on a small island in Massachusetts. Now look at this image of the ivory-billed woodpecker, known as the Lord God bird because of the exclamation people would make when they saw its massive 20-inch frame and striking white beak. It was the ghost of the southern swamps. This photo, taken by Arthur Allen in 1935, is one of the last undisputed images of a living ivory bill. You can see the bird's intense gaze and its powerful grip on the tree bark. The ivory bill needed massive tracts of old-growth forest to survive, but as the logging industry moved through the American South, their habitat vanished. For decades, people have claimed to see them, and there are blurry videos that spark endless debate. But this clear, crisp image from the 30s remains our most haunting link to a bird that many believe has already crossed over into the realm of legends. It represents a wilderness that we can never truly get back. We must also mention the imperial woodpecker of Mexico. Even larger than the ivory bill, this was the largest woodpecker to ever live. It was nearly 2 feet tall. This rare and shaky film footage from the 1950s, captured by a dentist on a hunting trip, is the only record we have of this bird in the wild. In the grainy frames, you can see the giant bird hitching its way up a massive pine tree. It looks like something from a prehistoric era. The imperial woodpecker lived in the high-altitude forests of the Sierra Madre, but as those forests were cut down, the giant disappeared. There are no clear high-resolution photographs of this bird alive today. Only these ghostly, flickering images that remind us of the giants that once roamed our forests. Let's pivot to Australia and the paradise parrot. Often called the most beautiful bird in Australia, it had a stunning mix of turquoise, scarlet, and black plumage. This photograph, taken in the early 1920s, shows a pair at their nesting site in a termite mound. The paradise parrot was unique because it nested inside these mounds, benefiting from the stable temperature. However, a combination of overgrazing, drought, and the introduction of domestic cats led to their rapid decline. The photographer Cyril Girard spent months trying to document them, realizing even then that he was looking at a dying race. In the photograph, the birds looked delicate and vibrant, completely unaware that within a decade, their entire population would disappear into the outback, leaving behind only these few precious images. The story of the Laysan rail is another testament to how fragile life can be on an island. This small, flightless bird lived on the tiny island of Laysan in the Pacific. It was curious, fearless, and would even walk right over the feet of researchers. This photograph shows a rail scurrying across the sand, looking almost like a little cotton ball on legs. When rabbits were introduced to the island, they ate every scrap of vegetation, turning the paradise into a desert. In a desperate attempt to save them, some birds were moved to Midway Atoll. But during World War II, rats escaped from ships onto Midway, and the flightless rails stood no chance. The last Laysan rail was seen in 1944. This photo is a reminder that even the most remote corners of the Earth are not safe from the unintended consequences of human movement. Now consider the Wake Island rail. This story is particularly tragic because it happened during the height of human conflict. This rail was endemic to the tiny atoll of Wake Island. In the photographs taken by servicemen before the war, the bird appears quite common and unafraid. However, during the Japanese occupation of the island in World War II, the island was cut off from supply lines. The soldiers, facing starvation, were forced to find food wherever they could, and the flightless rail became a primary source of sustenance. By the time the war ended and the island was liberated, not a single rail was left. It is a haunting example of how even a species that has nothing to do with human politics can be caught in the crossfire and erased in a matter of months. Looking at the Bachman's warbler, we see a tiny yellow and black songbird that once migrated between the southeastern United States and Cuba. This photograph, one of the very few in existence, shows a bird that looks like a typical warbler, bright and energetic. But the Bachman's warbler had a very specific requirement. It loved the canebrakes of the southern swamps. As these swamps were drained for agriculture, the bird simply had nowhere to go. The last confirmed sighting was decades ago. And while it was only recently officially declared extinct, these old photographs are all we have of a bird that once added its high-pitched buzz to the southern spring. Let's go back to the islands once more, specifically to New Zealand and the laughing owl. This large, handsome owl was named for its strange call, which sounded like a series of dismal shrieks or a loud, maniacal laugh. In this photograph from the late 1800s, you see a captured owl staring back at the camera with huge, soulful eyes. They were ground-nesting birds, which made them incredibly vulnerable to introduced stoats and cats. New Zealand's unique bird life evolved without land predators, so when these animals arrived, the laughing owl had no defense. The laughter of the New Zealand forests went silent forever in the early 20th century. The Eskimo curlew is our next subject. Once known as the prairie pigeon, this shorebird migrated in the millions from the Arctic tundra all the way to the pampas of South America. This rare, grainy photograph of a curlew in the wild is a precious record of a journey that was one of the longest in the bird world. They were so numerous that when they landed in the Great Plains, they covered the ground like a carpet. But like the passenger pigeon, they were hunted on a massive scale. By the time anyone realized they were in trouble, their numbers had collapsed. This photo represents a time when the world seemed infinite, and we didn't think we could ever reach the bottom of nature's barrel. We also have the bush wren of New Zealand. This tiny, nearly flightless bird lived in the dense, mossy forests. This photograph is one of the few that captures the bird's unique posture and its tiny, delicate frame. In the 1960s, a plan was made to move the last remaining bush wrens to a predator-free island. But during the relocation, a storm hit, and the birds were lost. It was a last-ditch effort that ended in heartbreak. The photo remains as a testament to the fragile beauty of New Zealand's ancient forests. The story of the slender-billed curlew is one of the most recent and mysterious extinctions. This bird was once common across the Mediterranean and Central Asia. This photograph, taken in the 1990s in Morocco, shows what many believe to be one of the last individuals ever seen. It's a bird with a long, elegant, down-curved beak and beautiful spotting on its feathers. Researchers spent years following this specific bird, hoping it would lead them to a hidden breeding ground. But it never did. It eventually disappeared, and despite intensive searches across its entire range, no more have been found. This photo represents the modern era of extinction, where we have all the technology to track a bird, but we still can't stop it from slipping away. What do all of these photographs tell us? Why do we find them so captivating and so painful to look at? Each image is a bridge across time. When you look into the eye of the last Kawaiʻaoa or the last Carolina parakeet, you are seeing a creature that was the result of millions of years of evolution. Each of these birds had a role to play in the ecosystem. They moved seeds, they controlled insects, they provided songs that defined the landscape. When they vanished, the world became a little quieter and a little less vibrant. These photographs serve as an alarm. They remind us that the birds we see in our backyards today, the ones we often take for granted, are not guaranteed to be here forever. Many of the birds in these photos were once thought to be so numerous that they could never go extinct. The passenger pigeon is the ultimate proof that you can go from billions to zero in a human lifetime. It shows that extinction isn't just about small, rare populations. It's about how we interact with the world around us. But there is also a message of hope in these images. By studying what went wrong for the heath hen or the great auk, we have learned how to save others. Because of these tragedies, we now have the Endangered Species Act. We have massive conservation efforts for birds like the California condor and the whooping crane, birds that were on the same path as the ones in these photos but were pulled back from the edge. These photographs are our teachers. They remind us of the value of what we still have. Every time a bird species goes extinct, it's like a library burning down. We lose a unique way of being in the world. We lose a specific song, a specific migration route, a specific set of behaviors that were unique to that bird. These photos are the only surviving pages from those libraries. They are precious, they are haunting, and they are a call to action. We are the first generation in history that actually knows why extinctions happen, which means we are also the first generation that has the power to stop them. Think about the photographer who took that last picture of the Kawaiʻaoa. They knew they were documenting the end. They knew that their lens was capturing something that would never be seen again. That responsibility is now ours. We are the witnesses. Every time you support a local nature preserve, every time you plant a native tree, and every time you advocate for the protection of a wetland, you are working to ensure that the birds of today don't become the grainy photographs of tomorrow. The silence of the Martha's Vineyard clearing where Booming Ben once performed his dance is a heavy silence. It's a silence that we created. But by listening to the stories of these birds, we can make sure that other silences don't follow. We can keep the duets alive. We can keep the migrations moving. We can keep the vibrant colors of the forest in the trees where they belong, rather than just in museum drawers and old film canisters. Extinction is often described as a door closing, but these photographs are like a keyhole that allows us to peek back into the room. We can see the textures of their feathers, the curve of their beaks, and the light in their eyes. They aren't just statistics. They weren't just names on a list. They were living, breathing beings that shared this planet with our grandparents and great-grandparents. They were part of the same story that we are currently writing. As you look at these images, I want you to appreciate the sheer diversity of what we've lost. From the giant woodpeckers of the Mexican pines to the tiny, scurrying rails of Pacific Islands, each one was a masterpiece of nature. The fact that we have these photos is a miracle in itself. In a time when cameras were heavy, slow, and expensive, someone took the effort to point them at these birds. They sensed, even then, that these creatures were special. We live in a time of rapid change, and many species are currently on the brink. The lessons from these photographs have never been more relevant. We are currently the guardians of the world's biodiversity. It's a big job, but it's the most important one we have. These birds might be gone, but their memory can inspire us to protect the survivors. Their final moments, captured in these frames, can be the spark that saves those who are still here. When you go outside tomorrow and you hear a bird singing, take a second to really listen to it. Don't just hear it as background noise. Hear it as a performance that is millions of years in the making. Know that that song is a gift, and it's one that we have the power to protect. We might not be able to bring back Martha or Booming Ben, but we can make sure the birds of our time don't have to sing their final duets alone. Each of these photos is a reminder of our impact on the world, both good and bad. We have the power to destroy, but we also have the power to heal and protect. These extinct birds are gone, but their photographs live on to remind us of the beauty we must fight for. They are the ghosts of our past, showing us the way to a better future for the creatures who still call this planet home. The story of life on Earth is one of constant change, but we are the first species to ever influence that change on such a massive scale. We have a front-row seat to the most incredible show on Earth, the vast and varied world of animals. These rare photographs of lost birds are our invitation to value that show while it's still playing. The birds in these photos may have taken their last flight, but their story is still being told through us. As we reach the end of this journey through the archives, think about the pride in that ivory-billed woodpecker's stance, or the delicate elegance of the paradise parrot. Those were real moments of life. They were beautiful, they were vital, and they were here. Their legacy is the awareness they give us today. We can't change the past, but we are the architects of the future. Every bird that still flies is a victory, and every habitat we save is a promise kept. In the quiet grain of an old photo, the past speaks to us. It tells us that beauty is fragile, and that curiosity is a gift. It tells us that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves. These last photos of extinct birds aren't just about what we lost. They're about what we still have a chance to save. Let's make sure we don't look back 50 years from now at the photos we take today and feel the same sense of phantom loss. Let's keep the world wild, beautiful, and full of song. There is a finality to these images that can be overwhelming, but let that feeling fuel your passion for the natural world. Let it make you more observant, more caring, and more committed to the environment. The passenger pigeon, the heath hen, the kawaii-oo, they have all moved on, but their presence is still felt in the efforts of every conservationist and every nature lover. They are the silent partners in our mission to protect the Earth. Thank you for taking the time to look at these phantoms of the sky with us. Their stories are a vital part of our history, and their faces should never be forgotten. By remembering them, we keep their spirit alive and we honor the incredible history of life on our planet. Continue to look, continue to learn, and continue to love the wild world that surrounds you. It's the only one we have, and it's full of wonders that are still waiting to be protected. The birds in these photographs might be gone, but the sky is still waiting for the next generation of flyers. Let's make sure they have a place to land. Let's make sure their songs are heard for millions of years to come. The ghosts of the past have spoken, And now it's our turn to answer. Let's make the answer a loud, vibrant, and living one. The world is still full of wings, and every single pair is a miracle worth saving. We are fortunate to have these records. They are the visual echoes of a different world. As you go about your day, carry these images with you. Let them remind you that the world is a fragile and beautiful place. And remember, the story of these birds doesn't end with their extinction. It continues through the actions we take today to protect the wild. Let's make it a story worth telling, a story of recovery, resilience, and a world that stays forever full of life.